Gentlemen, good morning, and welcome to the grand finals of the 2024 edition of the Public Sector Debate Competition. I'm Kamisha Swaby, your Master of Ceremonies, and I am thrilled to be here with you all. As we are here, just a day after celebrating our independence, it's a poignant reminder of the power of words and the impact our voices have in shaping our nation's future. Not just the future of the public service, but indeed the future of the entire nation of Jamaica. Today, we bring the same spirit of freedom of expression to this stage, where our top 4 teams are ready to showcase their prowess and passion through debate. Before we dive into today's exciting debates, please join me in standing for the national anthem, carrying with us the pride and joy of yesterday's Independence Day celebrations. Please be seated. What a beautiful anthem we have. Even without the words being played, it is such a fantastic composition. Now, ladies and gentlemen, a little over 2 months ago, we all gathered in this very room for the launch of this competition. At the time, all 26 teams were here, eager to show their prowess, and today we are down to the top 4. The top 4 teams are ready to show down in the third place playoff and in the final match. Now, I have been following the competition via the TIU's social media platform, and I tell you, this was a spectacular staging. I feel like I say this every year that I'm a part of the competition, but honestly, I don't think it has ever been more fitting to say it than that the 2024 staging of the Public Sector Debate Competition had really robust dialogue, and we saw some fantastic matchups. Wouldn't you agree? The intriguing moots, the angles from which teams reasoned their arguments, which evidenced the extensive research and preparation that went into each match, that was absolutely admirable. Give yourselves another round of applause. This competition was better for having each and every one of you be a part of it. And I'm sure you're all better for having participated in this competition. Yeah? I hear someone say true. I like when people speak back to me. I enjoy it. At this time, I would like to specially recognize some esteemed guests in the audience. We have Cabinet Secretary, Miss Audrey Sewell, and also Executive Director of the Transformation Implementation Unit, Miss Maria Thompson Walters. I would also like to acknowledge the senior executives of the participating entities who are here to support their teams. And we know they bring big support. But It is not my duty to do the official welcome. The person doing just that is Miss Maria Thompson Walters, Executive Director of the TIU, host of this competition. Please help me make her welcome.
Thank you, Kamisha. Good morning, everybody. Wow, this competition has grown significantly. Honorable Audrey Sewell, Cabinet Secretary, senior members of ministries, departments, agencies, members of the TIU, members of the Jamaica Association for Debating and Empowerment, JADE, members of the press, debating teams, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome. I am very excited this morning to welcome you to the grand finals of the third staging of the Public Sector Debates Competition, and a very special welcome to persons who are joining us online. I hope everybody had a great Emancipendence as we celebrated Jamaica's 62, one love to the world. I know I can't do the Usain Bolt thing, so. Why is debating important? And why did the TIU decide to embark on this debating competition journey with the public sector when what we are interested in is in the transformation of our public sector? Debates, especially structured debates, serve as a valuable tool for personal growth and effective communication. And those are two hallmarks of transformation. Out of transformation, we expect that persons will grow professionally and personally, and that our communication moves up a level. It fosters open-mindedness. And again, if we are to embark on this transformation journey, we must be open-minded. We must appreciate that there is another way to do things that may be very different from the way that we have always done things. That is the transformation mindset. We have to consider multiple perspectives when we're preparing for a debate, because if we don't, then our opposition is going to wipe the floor with us. We won't be able to rebut effectively. And for those of us that are involved in making public policy or in providing a public service, we must have this view of multiple perspectives, because we're not providing the service for ourselves. So we have to be able to really step into our customers' shoes and look at what we are providing from their perspective. Debating helps us to do that. It hones our skills in critical thinking, and most importantly, it helps us to speak up and to speak out. And as public officers, truth be told, sometimes we hide behind the policy and we hide behind the public image, the public officer image, where we're at our desks, we're doing our work. But sometimes we have to challenge ourselves. We have to speak up. We have to speak out. And so debating is a perfect fit for transformation. Since the launch of this year's competition in May, many of us have watched the teams present very well-researched and compelling arguments as they debated issues and policies that impact the public sector, Jamaica at large, and even globally. With an almost equal field of new and returning teams to the staging of the competition, we witnessed the prowess of many of the long-standing teams. And boy, were we introduced to a few new heavy hitters. And you will see some of them in action today. These teams have weathered the storms with us and seamlessly pivoted when we had to postpone the quarterfinals due to Hurricane Beryl. This caused some shifts in the competition's dates, but we're here now, and we are grateful for your cooperation. Ladies and gentlemen, undoubtedly, this debate competition is having a positive impact on the public sector. I'm encouraged when participants share their feedback with me on how the competition has helped to broaden their worldview and their perspectives, as well as give them the opportunity to meet and interact with colleagues from across the public service. And that is one thing that we need to improve on, how we interact across our public service. It is a big organization. And a lot of times we only know the people in our organization or in those ministries or departments that we have to interface with. This is a perfect opportunity. I have seen passion on display as the teams moved through the rounds. And I must say, this level of commitment and dedication gives me great hope as we together seek to build a better public service. I have seen the sacrifices that the teams have made and the hard work that the debaters have put into this competition, with moods ranging from having public utilities privatized and capping bank fees, to even more controversial moods to do with compensation for our politicians. You have shown that you are masters of research and reasoning. You should be proud of yourselves. Please give all the teams a round of applause. I would like to especially recognize an organization that we could not have done this without. Our partners from JADE, who have been with us from the beginning of this competition in 2019. And as you can hear, I don't know who is more excited about this competition, JADE or us. JADE have been our trainers and our judges for the competition, and they have done a sterling job. They had the mammoth task of tackling some very closely connected matches, but this partnership has contributed significantly to the success of the competition. For this year's competition, we have invested over $3.5 million in prizes and awards. I know this has done a little bit to incentivize the teams to bring their A games. We also wanted to ensure that every team is rewarded in some way, no matter how small. The team support for this competition has been evident by the strong turnout in person and online for the matches. For those of you in the room, if you have not already done so, be sure to engage with us on Instagram and X at TIU_Jamaica and on Facebook at TIU Jamaica, as we have many more exciting projects on the horizon. And believe you me when I tell you, exciting is an understatement. Today's two matches, the third place playoff and the grand final, will showcase the best of the best in this year's competition. Teams, I wish you all good luck, and I'm eager to see who will be victorious in our 2024 Public Sector Debates competition. But remember, it's not always about winning or losing. It is about what you gain from the experience, and it is about what we learn collectively as a public sector. Ladies and gentlemen, you are in for a treat. Welcome and thank you.
Thank you, Maria. And our debaters are also gentlemen, eh? Yes, okay. Give me my cookie. I saw some amazing things in a gift basket over there, you see? Okay. Anyway, Maria, listen, I do agree that there were many nail-biting finishes that had me and other viewers glued to the screen because there were certain matches that I didn't even think we should bother debate because I just agreed. Or disagreed. Very true. But it was fantastic to hear the robust perspectives. And I am sure that today will be just as amazing. Now, this year's competition proved to be exciting, even more so, with a slight change in format, with an added 5-minute question and answer segment from teams to their opponents. Teams were excited for this change in format, and it gave them more space to interrogate their opponents' arguments and also to drive home their points. The teams excelled at this, and it made for more interesting and spirited discussions. Now, at the end, 4 teams dominated. Who will take home the most prestigious prizes today? For third place playoff, it will be the Teaching Service or the Ministry of Education and Youth? For the champion debate team, will it be the Administrator General's Department or the Ministry of Justice? And Maria mentioned it. There's been a sort of changing of the guard of the heavy hitters, right? Boy, just like in the Olympics this year, eh? We're grieving and we're celebrating. Yes? Anyway, let's have a round of applause for the 4 top teams. And you know what? We've seen some of our athletes who've trained hard, and then they've not been able to make it on the big stage at the Olympics because of an injury here or there or something else. But that doesn't mean they didn't put in excellent work and did a good showing, right? So let's put our hands together for all the other teams who participated in this year's staging of the competition. Thank you. Now, have you noticed anything particular about our top 4 and the matches? Could be several things. Yes, you've noticed something? Well, if you haven't, third place playoff is between our educators. Yeah. Yes. See, I put on the lecturer voice, yeah? The classroom and the central ministry. And for the grand finale, it's the justice sector. I need a gavel or something. Central ministry and one of its departments. How uncanny is that? Lots of rich conversation about education and also about justice are happening right now. And it is almost poetic, trending. That it had to come from the educators to tell me about trend, right? All right. No, I like how we're warming up. Ladies and gentlemen, drum roll is what I would give you, but it is now time for our first of 2 matches for today, the third place playoff between the Teaching Service and the Ministry of Education and Youth. Who will be debating the moot? Be it resolved that judges should be afforded more discretion in determining minimum sentences for crimes. The educators looking at a matter of justice, eh? Let's take that again. The moot is, be it resolved that judges should be afforded more discretion in determining minimum sentences for crimes. Let's hear it for the teams. Now, I will first invite Team Proposition to introduce themselves. Thank you very much. Round of applause for them. And now, let me ask Team Opposition to introduce themselves, lip gloss and all.
Good morning, everyone. Novelet McLean Francis.
Good morning, Crystal Williams.
Good morning, everyone. Karif Clark.
Thank you, teams. Round of applause for opposition. Now, our adjudicators for today's match are our partners from the Jamaica Association of Debating and Empowerment, JADE Limited. Judges, Men in Black, please introduce yourselves.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Curtis Wallace, and I'm a wing adjudicator.
Thank you. Morning, everyone. I'm Cleveland Tomlinson, and I'll be a wing adjudicator.
Good morning, everyone. Jermaine Barrett is my name, and I'll be the chair adjudicator for this match.
Good morning, everyone. Joshua Atkins, timekeeper.
Thank you very much to our panel. And just a reminder to everyone watching this match that the views expressed by the teams are not necessarily their views. This is a debate, and it is a safe space for people to argue their points in the most persuasive manner. Right, judges?
Absolutely.
Good. And now, let's get started in this, the third place playoff. Good luck, teams, and over to you, judges.
Thank you very much, Kamisha. And we are ready to get the match started. But before we do so, just remind particularly our viewing audience of the essential rules, the time signals. So each team has a separate, different times. The first speaker gets 7 minutes, the second speaker 6 minutes. Then we'll pause for that cross-questioning section that Kamisha spoke about earlier. And then we take a 1 minute pause and resume with 5 minute reply speeches from either team. Your first and last minutes are protected from points of information. You will hear a ding of a bell to signal that you've spoken for 1 minute, and then another ding of that bell signals that you have 1 minute to go. You will hear 2 dings of the bell to indicate that you're out of time, but we as judges, we give you 10 seconds extra. So in the case of the first speaker, for example, 7 minutes and 10 seconds, you will hear continuous dinging of the bell with signals that you should stop and make way for the speaker on the other team. All right? Are there any questions, debaters? All right. So at this time, I call on the first speaker from the proposition team, the teaching services. Let's make them welcome. Hear, hear.
Be it resolved that judges should be afforded more discretion in determining minimum sentences for crimes. There are 2 terms that we want to begin by defining them. But generally speaking, the motion is pretty straightforward. Important nonetheless. Firstly, crime. So when we're talking about crime, we're talking about offenses or actions, behaviors that are either implicitly or explicitly forbidden by law. Oftentimes, these actions or behaviors warrant punishment such as prison time, fines. In some cases, there are some other forms of punishment like community service, etc. The big term that really needs to be properly understood is what we're talking about when we talk about minimum sentences. And we want to use a term that is more popularly appreciated, called mandatory minimum sentence. And I'll tell you why I want to tie it to mandatory minimum in a little bit. But when we talk about minimum sentences generally, we're talking about those forms of punishments handed out for crimes that have a bottom or starting point, meaning that they are required, when found guilty, to serve this time or more. And so typically what happens when a judge is bound by these minimum sentences, it means that regardless of the circumstances of the individual case, that's very important, regardless of the circumstances of the individual case, the judge is forced to use that or more in terms of the sentencing. And this is what is problematic with removing discretion. So that brings us to the status quo. We discussed as a team and we were wondering, in what instances would a judge need to have discretion or not have discretion? And that's why we've chosen to use a synonymous term, mandatory minimum sentence. The only real thing that can prevent a judge from having the discretion in terms of providing sentences is if by law the parliament, or what we call the legislature, has decided that the mandatory starting point or maximum or fixed, whatever it is, but in our case we're talking about a mandatory minimum, must be that an individual serves his time. And so that removes from the power of, or the responsibility and the power of the judge, the ability to fall below this mandatory minimum. And a little bit of signposting, Roshane, our second speaker, will talk more in depth about why this is problematic for the justice system. But I want to begin by stating that the judiciary, which is separate from legislature, the judiciary is the arm of government that has largely two very important roles. One, to hand out sentences for guilty people, and two, to ensure that the execution of justice is done as fair as possible. Now, fairness, unlike what the common person thinks, is not just for the victim, but also for the offender. There are fundamental rights and privileges afforded even to the individual who is even found guilty. Justice must be done in such a way that it is done fairly. And we think that these mandatory minimums remove that ability. Now, as I said before, Roshane will talk more in depth about that. But I want to now transition to something that we probably never considered when we think about the removal of the discretion of the judge. That this is problematic for the concept of separation of powers. Our country and our our government system is set up such that, and this is worldwide, that the judiciary is separate from the legislature. The legislature is what we have in parliament, the politicians who rise to power, and they often are tasked with the responsibility of creating laws. But it is important that these individuals do not also have the power to execute justice, and there's a reason for that. Take, for instance, 35-year-old Jerome.
Point of information.
Who, I'll take you after this anecdote, who was pressured by the gang to transport illegal guns. And this individual is pressured because the gang is telling him that either he does it or he and his family will be killed. Now, when there is mandatory minimum sentence, he will be found guilty of possession of illegal guns, whether or not he had the motive or intention to engage in this willingly. Now, of course, he is guilty. But as a judge and as a well-thinking individual, you have to consider that he was put between a rock and a hard place. The way things are set up now, absent mandatory minimum sentence, which means proposition is arguing for the status quo, to keep what is called the Supreme Court guideline to sentencing. Judges are given a plethora of guidelines and suggestions that will help them to come up with the fairest possible sentence for every individual, case by case, based on the facts of the case. But Jerome, in a world where there's a 15-year mandatory minimum sentence for illegal possession, will be forced to serve 15 years, despite the fact that he was held literally at gunpoint and being forced to engage in illegal activity. But a judge, considering the circumstances of Jerome, might be inclined instead to consider other factors such as He has no prior engagements with the law. He has no history of deviance, and might be probably willing to consider something that serves even the role of rehabilitation, such as simply community service. Now I'll ask you, while they are considering, I see some lawyers looking at me, can I take her point, even though it's my last minute? Okay, unfortunately, let's say I can't take you. My bad. But so the issue we are faced with now is, which of the two options provides for the full function and success of roles of the judiciary system? The latter.
Sorry, you're out of time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very
My
much.
bad.
All right. Thank you very much, first proposition speaker. We now call upon the first speaker from the opposition team representing the Ministry of Education and Youth. Let's make that speaker welcome. Hear, hear.
Adjudicators and my worthy opponents from the teaching service, members of the audience, good morning. Mr. Speaker, I would like to acknowledge the firm foundation that has been set by the proposition for us to argue our arguments. In fact, it should be noted as well that the guidelines as indicated by the first proposition speaker are not laws, and that is what we need to indicate. In opposing the mood, we firmly declare that judges should not be afforded more discretion as it relates to minimum sentencing. My substantives will explore social contracts, the importance of mandatory minimum sentencing, flaws inherent in discretionary sentencing, and punishment from two theoretical perspectives. Mr. Speaker, our constitutional democracy rests upon the underlying issue of a social contract. Both implicit and explicit in this social contract is the understanding that the electorate, having elected their government, should always have their best interests reflected in laws and policies. The determination of minimum sentencing should never reside with any one individual, especially one who has not been elected by the majority of a constituency. Legislators have a responsibility to define and prescribe laws while upholding the fundamental rights of not just the offenders, but the victims who oftentimes experience very heinous and life-altering crimes. As the Chief Justice indicated, it appears that there is a current imbalance in the approach to sentencing. It appears too preoccupied with the rights of the defendants and insufficiently concerned about the impact of the crime on the victim. In case we have forgotten, let me remind us of Talia Thompson, Daniel Rowe, Nikita Noel. Last year, all three were killed. They were raped, two in fact, and the third had her throat slashed, and they were just 8 years old. The perpetrators were all known to them. The public needs to have trust in the justice system that each perpetrator receives an equal minimum sentence. In this civilized society, I am sure we do not want people to take matters into their own hands or exercise jungle justice. Mr. Speaker, mandatory minimum sentencing laws serve several purposes, including deterring offenders and reducing crime, controlling judicial discretion, increasing prison sentences for certain crimes, and sending a strong message that the legislature is taking action, not at this time. As far back as 1997, the National Institute for Justice in the US reported that mandatory sentences for gun use resulted in decreased homicide rates in large cities. The 2020 Insight Crime Report identified Jamaica as having the highest homicide rate in Latin America and the Caribbean, with a rate of 46.5 per 100,000 people. In fact, in the 2018 case in Portland, 4 men were convicted of possession of 18 illegal firearms and a bucket load of ammunition. The irony, Mr. Speaker, is that while 3 of the men were sentenced to 5 years consecutive terms for each gun, the 4th victim was sentenced to 18 years. This is discretionary sentencing. The mandatory minimum sentencing ensures that sentences reflect the seriousness of the offense, avert prospects of lenient sentences, and promote certainty and predictability. We acknowledge that the judges are trained and have amassed generally years of professional experience. However, mandatory minimum sentences does not prevent the judges from exercising their discretion when administering sentences. The very fact that mandatory minimum exists suggests that there conveys a maximum, and it is for the judge to administer accordingly. Mr. Speaker, discretionary sentencing allows for higher levels of subjectivity, allows judges to make decisions as they see fit, and facilitates compassion. Go ahead.
And that we contend is a good thing about it, because the subjectivity of it is naturally inherent in each case. And allowing for that subjective approach allows a judge to be able to fall below a minimum where necessary.
Thank you. And as indicated earlier, there is a range. So if there is a minimum, there is a maximum. And the judges already have discretion to make that declaration. But, Mr. Speaker, perpetrators oftentimes have no compassion for innocent lives taken through reckless and dangerous driving. The many young males who are victims to gun crime and women and children who are raped. 2024 data from the World Population Review revealed that 35% of women have faced sexual assault. Women ages 16 to 19 are 4 times more likely to be victims of rape or sexual assault. And 94% of women who are raped experience post-traumatic stress disorder. And let us not forget that men too are victims. In a 2019 study, 1,000 males from India reported that they are victims of violence, including emotional, sexual, and physical violence. On that note, when will our legislators update our laws so men can actually be protected? While it may be argued that lawmakers may not always have an appreciation for all crimes to be committed, this poses the perfect opportunity for our legislators to engage in consultative processes when determining what becomes law. Additionally, we are not saying that harsher punishments alone will solve all our crime issues, but we argue that mandatory minimum sentences have proven effective along with other strategies. Our arguments are grounded in primarily 2 theories of punishment: deterrence and rehabilitation, and I will now expound on these. Mr. Speaker, since the start of 2024, not accepted, Jamaica has recorded in excess of 2,250 serious crimes, including murder, shooting, rape, abduction, firearm offenses, break-ins, and robberies. In 2023, despite a 20% reduction in murders and other categories of major crimes, Jamaica was ranked 10th on the global list of countries with the highest crime rate. Given the levels of major crimes in this country, legislators who have an obligation to society must ensure that strong signals are sent to criminals, regardless of the magnitude, and should ensure that these criminals do not get an understanding or an appreciation that these crimes are condoned. Given the crime statistics, Jamaica criminals and potential criminals should understand that their actions have serious consequences. Jamaica should not continue to have a good reputation even when doing bad. In other words, we need to have minimum sentences to deter crimes. Mr. Speaker, mandatory minimum as punishment for rehabilitation serves to benefit the perpetrators, communities, and the nation. Offenders need to understand their errors and undergo an effective process of reform. In 2012, Junior Christie was convicted of stealing some pads of ackee from King's House. Including my opponents, others may argue that the punishment was excessive. However, the fact that Christie was convicted, it also means that he had 8 other previous convictions, 6 of which were for dishonesty. Had he been punished and reformed properly, he would not have recommitted these crimes. Mr. Speaker, in closing, the government must ensure that it fulfills its obligation in ensuring that the social contract is protected. And mandatory minimum sentences need to send a strong signal while taking action against crime. As the Chief Justice suggests, the commission of a crime is always a choice, regardless of the circumstance. Thank you.
We thank the first speaker from Team Ministry of Education and Youth, representing side opposition. We now call upon the second speaker from Teaching Service, representing the proposition side, to advance their case. Hear, hear.
Ladies and gentlemen, and members of this honorable house, morning. So I must remind my opponents of why we're having this debate. See, hiding behind the policy of mandatory minimum is a crime problem, a frustration on the side of lawmakers, and an inadequate solution to the problem of crime. This, therefore, highlights that we have a legislation problem and a crime-fighting problem, and not a problem with judges being able to carry out their jobs effectively. Now, what is preventing them from being even more effective is the mandatory minimum, which you would want to see exist. Now, just a few rebuttals before I lie to you that the issue of discretion best suits the justice system, and also it builds public trust. Now, we get from the opponents that there's a social contract, but we want to highlight to you that the judiciary has a particular role of executing, the legislature have a particular role of creating these laws, and with these checks and balances, our social contract is better protected, and we are better benefited from the social contract theory.
Point
now,
of
crime
information.
is out of control. That's what you basically told us through your first speaker. But we want you to reflect on the seriousness of the crimes, and also understand that there is a group of persons who this mandatory minimum will only serve to disadvantage. And that's what we are saying. Consider the circumstances. Justice is founded on subjectivity. That is why we have trials. That is why the judges and jury must sit and carry out sentencing, because
Point
justice
of
is based on
information.
discretion. I'll take you soonly. So on the matter of discretion, what you're saying, it is enough to just sit between the maximum and the minimum, and that is okay. Nobody falls outside of the minimum for you. But we are going to show you that justice is best served when we look at the fact that justice must entail deterrence, punishment of offenders, rehabilitation of offenders, and the protection for the society. So on the matter of deterrence, with discretion, we have to ask ourselves the question, do mandatory minimum sentences effectively deter crime compared to judicial discretion? Now, mandatory minimums are kind of a tough on crime approach that supposedly deter crime. But in the US, what we see is that there was a mandatory minimum being imposed from the 1980s to the 1990s. And what happened is that there was not a reduction in crime, only an overpopulation of prisons and crime getting out of control. So it seems, therefore, that it doesn't deter crime. But what we saw, however, between 2007 to 2017 is that with the more lenient laws and with judges given more discretion, there was a 24% decrease in incarceration, and simultaneously in the northeastern states, there was a 30% reduction in crime because of more lenient approaches. So this impact is significant because it reinforces the
Point of information.
imposition of more lenient sanction, and that fact that they do not lead to a more dangerous society. Now, as it relates to punishment of offenders, less pressure is on the defendants. Now, what we see over and over again, because there's a mandatory minimum, persons have to gamble with their life, and I did say gamble, because if you are given a plea deal of 5 years as opposed to a mandatory minimum of 15 years, whether or not you are guilty, you don't want to gamble with your life like that. So persons are more likely to take the 5 years given to them by the lazy, those who, prosecutors, and right, by those prosecutors who use that as a way of clamping down on criminals. So this lazy approach is something that we want to get away with and ensure that
Point of
punishment is
information.
fair, taken quickly.
How do you feel about having dangerous criminals?
So we'll
walking
address the
away with
dangerous
life
criminals
sentences?
by saying that rehabilitation of offenders is an important part of this justice system. Can judges better promote rehabilitation and restorative justice with more discretion? Certainly. In fact, when this is taken into consideration, an individual who is required to serve, for example, 20 years minimum, is given the opportunity not to waste their lives in prison, but they are able to get a punishment that is more suitable to their crime, and this gives them more time to be better productive in society. Take Jerome, for example. If he should get 5 years as opposed to 15 years, he's better able to fit back in society.
information.
He's better able to provide for his family and continue to productively engage in society, because he will not have to face higher interest rates and less time to make himself productive in society when he returns from prison. Now, as it relates to protection for society, a justice system that prioritizes rehabilitation over punishment reflects a commitment to human dignity and the belief that people are capable of reform and change. And this best aligns with societal compassion and redemption. Now, giving judges more discretion in determining minimum sentences improves public trust. We understand that trust is not the primary aim of the justice system, but we are proposing that focusing on fairness, what we call justice, will lead to trust. Trust comes through fairness, and fairness is best represented by discretion than by mandatory minimum sentences. Judges can prioritize rehabilitation, and in the case of Jerome and others who fall below the limits of the minimum sentences, whose guilt does not equate to that the mandatory minimum, they are better able to be seen as persons who are not oppressed by the system. They are better able to trust in the system. And we see where the marginalized who often get these sentences are better able to fit into society, and the perception in society changes as it relates to mandatory minimums.
Thank you very much. Sorry I had to cut you off in full flight, but you know, we have to be abiding by the time signals. All right, so we now go back to team opposition to hear from their second speaker. Let's make that speaker welcome. Here.
May I? Mr. Speaker, other honorable adjudicators, family, ladies and gentlemen, as we have heard from my opposition minister, Jamaican law currently allows for a lot of discretion on the part of judges. And listening to my family member, I wondered if you're really living in Jamaica, because you are talking about more discretion for criminals and how there is a reduction in crime. Our statistics do not line up with yours at all. And we have victims who are really terrified by the light sentences that are being given to perpetrators. So we are asking you to think about that and wake up a little. We acknowledge, Mr. Speaker, that discretion is necessary and beneficial in special cases, as with some juveniles in special circumstances, serious intimidation or coercion of individuals, and on compassionate grounds such as severe disability or psychiatric illness or impairment. In a moment. And we offer no challenge to laws that are carefully crafted to protect these individuals on the basis of credible evidence. However, Mr. Speaker, we are greatly opposed to the laissez-faire manner in which a lot of judicial sentencing is currently being delivered, especially in the cases of serious crimes that have destroyed lives, threatened public safety, and given Jamaica a dirty name on both the regional and world scenes. In light of our current crime context, Mr. Speaker, we should not allow a judge for any willy-nilly reasons to pass sentences that are not commensurate with these crimes that threaten to wipe out our population more than the COVID-19 pandemic, Mr. Speaker. To elucidate this point, on January 16, 2018, the Gleaner reported that High Court judges in St. James were blasted for giving suspended sentences and fines as low as $700,000 to dozens of criminals convicted in illegal firearm cases. This is preposterous. This discretion sends a clear message. Do as you like. There is no real law, but we have to appease the citizens somewhat. For many of these criminals, Mr. Speaker, 70,000 or even 200,000, 700,000, 70,000, 200,000 is meal deal money. To top it all off, many of these criminals continue to commit crime again and again because they are documented repeat offenders, underscoring the point that time has come for something serious to happen. Also in the same year, Mr. Speaker, the Gleaner, January 18, 2018, cited 35 cases reportedly disposed of in the circuit courts in troubled parishes plagued by gang violence, St. James, Westmoreland, Hanover, and Trelawney, revealing that the stiffest penalty for gun-related convictions was a 5-year prison term across these parishes. Like, seriously, Mr. Speaker? In May 2022, the DPP noted that a judge was unduly lenient when a criminal who pleaded guilty to a double murder was only sentenced to 12
Point
years,
of information.
which he served concurrently, not consecutively, with the opportunity for parole after 10 years. The Gleaner 2022. Go ahead.
We share your concern about serious crimes, but the truth is that oftentimes in the cases we don't know the full extent of the seriousness of the matter, and when we see these sentences handed down, it seems unfair.
Thank you, my colleague. If you were listening in the beginning, I spoke about extenuating circumstances and opportunities, like plea bargaining, which you will hear about later, in our question and answer, which can alleviate some of that. Mr. Speaker, this is clearly a trend of letting off hardened criminals that we are doing with these things, and it must be stopped. Time does not allow us, Mr. Speaker, to cite the plethora of examples, cases which are frightening to say the least, Mr. Speaker. Is it fear, intimidation, or corruption of the judiciary system? We don't know, but something must give, not at this time. Desperate times call for desperate measures, Mr. Speaker. The Minister of Justice has noted that a clear message must be sent to criminals through increased mandatory minimums, GIS 2023. The opposition joins this call for swift and fair justice. Mr. Speaker, the mechanism of mandatory minimums also eliminates what we call judge shopping, wherein lawyers can try to have their cases tried before a particular judge with a view to benefiting from that judge's known leniency. Lawyers can actually delay cases, hoping not at this time that the judge's circulation sees the case being reassigned to another judge, especially in circuit court matters. In our world, in the opposition's world, it doesn't matter who the case is before. They will get a true prescribed sentence. This will militate against the waste of court resources and will allow for justice to be quicker, which leads to people having more trust in the justice system. Mr. Speaker, in handing down their sentences, the opposition finds that judges are not reflecting on how society feels about their decisions. Lord Justice Reed, UK Supreme Court, tells us the law must not distance itself from the society it governs. In response to High Court media and other criticisms for their discretionary light sentencing, Mr. Speaker, we got a vague statement that unverified information unfairly generates negative perceptions of sentencing practices and brings the judiciary and our system of justice into disrepute. The Gleaner, January 18, 2018. This arrogant dismissal of public response to widespread questionable sentencing without a respectful rebuttal shows that we do not respect public opinion. I
thank you very much. Debaters in our match, we are now ready to engage in the exciting cross-question section. And so, with 5 minutes on the clock, the opposition team has the opportunity to ask questions of team proposition, bearing in mind that a question is limited to 20 seconds and a response limited to 45 seconds. You may begin now, Ministry of Education and Youth, with your first question.
With a plethora of examples of judges abusing their discretionary powers, which we found in our research, why would you want to give them more discretion?
All right, so your concern is that judges are abusing their discretionary powers. And we take that is possible, it may happen. The concern we are having and contending is that there are cases, all of your examples are the worst case scenario of people who intend to do harm. What we are contending is that the issue of mandatory minimum sentence does not allow for things like what you're contending of plea deals. Plea deals does not go or allow the judge to go below a mandatory minimum sentence. And so what you find is those more nuanced cases of non-hardcore criminals who come before the court now and are faced with a mandatory minimum sentence do not get the
Thank you very
fair
much.
service.
45 seconds, that is. Thank you.
Just a quick follow-up question to that. I'm just asking, did you read the sentencing guidelines which outlines that even when a mandatory minimum is applied, a certificate may be given to the complainant or the person being charged to seek for plea bargaining? Did you miss that? Up to 50%.
And that is bad, because what it means is that an individual who the judge already knows does not deserve to serve these time must now write a certificate and say to them, you know what, my hands are tied, I don't believe you should get this time, but you have to do it. So go and start your service and then go to the Court of Appeal. Spend more money to try and get the justice that the judge already in the first instance thought was the better approach.
While prison populations may increase, wouldn't you agree with us that the state has an interest and should have an interest, as well as interested stakeholders, to better serve criminals through reformation programs?
And we are not seeing the reformation that you're proposing, because if you give a person a mandatory minimum and keep them in prison for a longer time than their crime or their guilt would deserve, what you're doing to that person is extending the detriment of their circumstances. We don't see the rehabilitation coming out of your proposition.
In fact, in the case of the US, what they found is that at some point there was prisons who were functioning above capacity, which resulted in tremendous degradation of sanity and mental strain on the individual. So by the time them come out, it's a set of mad people who hate the system, who hate society, and who don't get an opportunity to be reintegrated properly in society.
If my colleagues were paying attention to last week's report, even inmates, as reported in the Jamaica Observer, were awarded degrees last week, including a warden. Wouldn't you then agree with mandatory minimum sentences that they play a significant role in combating organized crime?
So are you saying that the longer they stay, the more likely they are to get a degree?
No, what we're saying is that when individuals are incarcerated, the state has a better opportunity of controlling how they are reformed.
And my follow-up to that...
Can we answer the question?
Mr. Speaker?
Right. So I would much rather be reformed on the outside than in the inside of a prison. So give me a shorter sentence.
Precisely. And so fundamentally, here is the problem. And you said it. It sounds as if you're using these mandatory minimum sentences, as Rasheen categorized it, as a form of social control. So if scamming gets out of hand, the parliament must now pass mandatory 20 years. If this gets out of hand, mandatory 20 years. If that gets out of hand, mandatory 20 years. There is no reformation in that thinking. All you're considering is to keep these people, regardless of the circumstance of their situation, longer in dark, nasty, mucky places that are when you're paid after you.
Okay, so I'm asking, in your utopia, you would prefer the criminals to be bundled in your backyard, taking out your grill, than to be in the prison?
Mr. Speaker, notice carefully that the proposition did not argue utopia. The proposition's argument is for the quintessential nuanced nature of the justice system. There are people who deserve the 20 and more years, but there are people who are forced to serve the 20 years, even though the judge and the rest of the society would think that that is just too harsh a sentence. Mandatory minimum prevents the judge from allowing the sentence to be below that 20 years, which would have been a more deserving punishment.
All right, thank you very much. A round of applause for the exchange. All right, so it's now time for round two. This time we ask the teaching service team to ask questions of the Ministry of Education and Youth, their counterparts.
All right, so family, how do you reconcile the need for individualized justice with a system that imposes the same mandatory minimum sentence on first-time offender and a repeat offender in Jamaica?
We are proposing that we work with the greater good. Some have to suffer for the great. That's just how it is. We can't do everything the way that you want. And that is why we say, give the juvenile in some cases, depending on what the juvenile has done, he may be a repeat offender, give him the mandatory minimum, and then give him a little, an opportunity to plea. Because in so doing, the net will capture the great number of hardened criminals that we must capture.
And in addition to that, we should also bear in mind that the mood speaks of crimes. So criminals, people who've actually committed a crime, these people need to be incarcerated.
All right, you admittedly stated that plea deals are important. So in the Jamaican justice system, with an often weak investigative arm, which results in dependence on plea deals, how would mandatory minimums aid in clearing up cases?
You go again?
Because we often have a weak investigative arm in the justice system, you're dependent on plea deals in many cases. With a mandatory minimum being presented to a criminal, how will that help to clear up the cases in the justice system?
I don't believe the moot is arguing about the efficiency of the investigators. What those individuals and authorities need to do is to improve, and there are legislatures and policies in place to fix those issues. What we're arguing is that mandatory minimum should be in place, and judges should not get more discretion because they already have discretion because there is a ceiling.
Too much.
But you would have admitted, like we do, that there are issues with the justice system. So we want to find out from you, how does a mandatory minimum assist in addressing those issues?
Mandatory minimum cannot be used in those ways to fix the justice system. That is another debate, another moot.
And what we're saying is that having committed a crime, there should be a minimum, because that will ensure that the public also reflects trust in the judicial system to ensure that if a crime is committed, people will have an equal opportunity to serve for the crimes that they have committed. Additionally, you spoke about fairness being represented through discretion. If you have 3 children being raped and killed, every one of those perpetrators should have a minimum sentence. No judge should determine that one gets 5 years, one gets 10, one gets 1 year based on antecedents. We have said that there are criminals out there and they should be punished, and mandatory minimum allows for a minimum sentence to be enforced.
Prevent judges from playing God.
Thank you.
Regarding the issue of a mandatory minimum, to what extent is a mandatory minimum better and much different from the status quo where the judge has recommended sentences or starting points that they use as reference when providing sentences, but they can go below?
As you have argued in your first points, the judges do not have an obligation to society. People who elect parliamentarians, who set laws, have an obligation to ensure that the rights of people are not infringed upon. And it is not for the judges to determine that, okay, I will willy-nilly, as Noblet said, administer justice because I prefer this individual or he's younger than. It is for the legislator, the parliamentarians, who have an obligation to the society to set those laws and to ensure that they're enforced by the judges.
So does that then mean that you're in support of the removal of the separation of powers, where the parliamentarians are now given the power that belongs to the judiciary to determine sentences for crimes?
As argued in my opening speech, the parliamentarians or the legislatures have that authority as elected by the people. The judges should enforce. And so we have clearly distinguished that there is no conflation of the issues. The judges enforce laws set by parliamentarians. Parliamentarians have been elected by the people, not judges.
Judges don't make laws.
Is it appropriate for a judicial system through mandatory minimums to blindly protect the interests of the plaintiffs and neglect the rights of the defendants or accused, even if found guilty?
But we were never proposing that.
Additionally, if I may just reread the quote by the Justice Brian Sykes, it appears that there is a current imbalance in the approach to sentencing. It appears too preoccupied with the rights of the defendants and insufficiently concerned about the impact of the crime on the victims.
All right, thank you very much. A round of applause. Well done. We will now pause for 1 minute to allow you to put the finishing touches on your reply speeches, at the end of which we'll resume with the reply speaker from Team Ministry of Education and Youth, followed by that from Team Teaching Service. Your 1 minute begins now. Time for us to resume. We now call upon the reply speaker from the opposition team, Ministry of Education and Youth. Let's make that speaker welcome. Hear, hear.
Good morning, everyone. The proposition claims that giving judges more discretion in determining minimum sentences will lead to less congested and unsanitary correctional facilities. However, we contend that the public would much rather our prisons be overpopulated with criminals as opposed to our communities being overpopulated with criminals. Additionally, our second speaker made reference to the period 2007 to 2017 that had the lowest incarceration rates. But must I remind you that within that same period, Jamaica saw its second highest murder rate in 2016. So I guess the criminals were actually in our societies committing these heinous crimes rather than being in prison as a result of your discretionary sentences. We note also that the first speaker's argument that discretionary sentencing is especially necessary for instances where juveniles and other vulnerable persons commit crime. And although we concede the importance of considering one's naivety and psychological development, leniency should not equate to a lack of accountability, especially for serious crimes. Their argument ignores the fact that Jamaica is one of the most violent countries where nearly half of those arrested for murder are actually youths, young, impressionable people between ages 14 and 24. But my opponents, if the justice system continues to be perceived as lenient towards these juveniles, then criminal masterminds will increasingly exploit them for criminal activities. Mandatory minimums ensure that penalties are directly linked to the crime itself rather than to the individual. For juvenile offenders, we suggest that prison-based rehabilitation should be prioritized along with post-release support to ensure successful reintegration. Furthermore, judges already have the discretion to deviate from these fixed minimums by applying sentencing discounts for guilty pleas for mitigating factors such as age, first offenses, and other unique circumstances. The opposition, though, contends that judges should not be given any further discretion. Earlier, my colleague referenced a case involving 4 men convicted for possessing 18 high-powered guns and 1,400 rounds of ammunition. In this case, Judge X sentenced 3 of them to 5 years each, whilst the 4th man, who pled guilty, by the way, received an 18-year sentence from another judge. Mr. Speaker, mandatory minimum sentences will serve as a buffer against flawed subjectivity and disparity in case sentencing, where otherwise greater discretion will undermine the consistency and the predictability of our justice system. In fact, as my colleague stated, these sentencing disparities may lead defendants to engage in what is known as judge shopping for a lenient judge, wasting the court's time and resources in the process. We also discussed a report from police investigators revealing 35 cases where individuals convicted of illegal possession of firearms and ammunition received probation and fines as low as $70,000 from high court judges. 35 cases in 1 year. In fact, in one case, and I quote, a St. James man convicted for illegal possession of firearm was admonished and discharged by the judge. Mr. Speaker, in a high crime society where 81% of violent crimes involve the use of illegal firearms, and with our Minister of National Security reporting that every month 200 illegal guns are smuggled into this country, there is no justification for judges to exercise this kind of discretion involving cases involving illegal weaponry. This also explains, Mr. Speaker, the frustration by the police, because despite their working tirelessly to recover these illegal weapons, their efforts are undermined by judges who impose lenient sentences. Furthermore, we cannot reasonably expect law-abiding citizens to furnish the police with information on criminals if they have come to expect that these offenders will receive lenient sentences and be swiftly released to the public to potentially target them. Additionally, if we are not careful, these flawed sentences could set a precedent and serve as a new standard for future cases. Mr. Speaker, we are not suggesting that mandatory minimums will reduce crime in and of itself, in the same way that these lenient sentences have not addressed the crime problem either. In fact, 41% of those released from prison in Jamaica go on to re-offend. Mandatory minimums may not deter criminals from committing crime, but it will deter law-abiding citizens from taking justice into their own hands. Minimum sentences should reflect the seriousness with which society views these offenses as they are set by parliamentarians.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
You heard the bill? You heard it? I didn't hear the bill. But if nobody heard the bill, none of us heard the bill. There was no bill.
Sorry, apologies. You are in fact out of time. We did ring the bell. It might not have been audible, but we apologize for that. Yes. All right. So we continue. We continue with the proposition team, their final submission in the debate. Let's welcome the teaching service reply speaker. Hear, hear.
Like families do, we always have little squabbles. So the first speaker, Karif, would have come and spoken about deterrence or minimum mandatory sentences are for as a deterrence. But the final speaker came and said it doesn't act as a deterrence. So what exactly are they arguing for? Let me begin and say justice is not just for the victim, but also for the offender. Let me also say that discretion does not mean freedom. Remember that young man that Kevin spoke about who's transported a gun? A first-time offender caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. He made a mistake. No doubt about it, but does this one error warrant a sentence that will strip away his future, shackle his potential, and condemn him to a life defined by a single moment? Under the current laws, our hands are tied. This young man, like many others, face mandatory minimum sentence that ignores the unique circumstances, his potential for rehabilitation, and the nuanced reality of his life. This is not justice. This is travesty. Mr. Speaker, there are certain there are certain clashes that the opposition would have failed to highlight within this debate, and I'm going to do their job for them. Because it seems as the family members don't know how to do things properly. That's why they're central government. But the teachers are going to teach. Ladies and gentlemen, the first clash in this debate is fairness in sentencing. From their model, the opposition argues that mandatory sentences ensure consistency and deter crime by providing clear and predictable consequences. We explain on the government side that this one-size-fits-all approach ignores the nuanced reality of individual cases. Imagine a world where one piece of art is painted with the same brushstroke. What a beauty would be lost. Similarly, mandatory minimum paint justice to be broad a brush, failing to account for the unique circumstances of each case. We have won this clash because we demonstrate that fairness and justice are paramount. Judicial discretion allows for consideration of mitigating factors, such as defendant's background, intent, and the nature of the crime. This nuanced approach ensures the punishment fits the crime rather than imposing a blanket sentence that might be excessively harsh or lenient. The second clash in this debate that we found out is deterrence. The opposition contends that mandatory minimum serves as a strong deterrent against crime. We explain on the government side that this argument overlooks the fact that deterrence is not solely a function of severity, but also of certainty and fairness. We recognize that the crime must be deterred, but not at the expense of justice itself. We won that clash in particular because we have illustrated that this judicial discretion promotes rehabilitation, which is the cornerstone of any legal system across the world. By considering individual circumstances, judges can impose sentences that are more likely to reform offenders and reduce recidivism. Mandatory minimums are like a sledgehammer to crack a nut, ineffective and destructive. The third clash in this debate is legislative intent versus the separation of power. The opposition tried to assert that mandatory minimums reflect the legislative intent to be tough on crime. Oh, what a travesty. Our model suggests that we respect legislative intent while enhancing its implementation. Judges, as experienced legal professionals, are well equipped to interpret and apply the laws in a manner which aligns to the spirit of the legislation while ensuring just outcomes. We win this contention because separation of powers is a crucial consideration to this debate. The principle ensures that while the judiciary interprets and applies the laws, it does not encroach on the legislative body. Judicial discretion in sentencing ensures that judges can make decisions based on the merits of the case, free from political or public pressure. This maintains that judiciary independence from the legislative and executive branches. By allowing judges discretion, the judiciary can serve as a check on potential overly harsh and unjust laws enacted by the legislator. This ensures that laws are just and serve justice and equity, aligning with the constitutional principles and human rights. Mr. Speaker, the government side envisions a world where justice is not blind to the nuances of humanity. A world where judges are entrusted with discretion to tailor sentences that fit not just the crime, but individual circumstances surrounding it. This approach ensures justice is truly served, promoting rehabilitation over mere punishment and allowing for proportionality that is the hallmark of a fair legal system. The opposition vision is one where fear and absolutism, where the law is a blunt instrument. The government vision is one of hope and reason, where the law is finely tuned tool for justice, and the teaching service have taught in this debate.
We thank both teams for a most enlightening contest. Thank you. At this time, we as the judges will, depart to deliberate. But before we officially depart, I turn back over to Madam Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, while we have been a little starved for medals, because we're used to certain things, we haven't been starved of wit and reasoning and sharp engagement today. Now, will it come down to splitting the difference by 5,000ths of a second in a photo finish? I don't know. But what I do know is the arguments have been made. Whose arguments were more persuasive? Which team has done enough to clinch the bronze medal, third place? That decision is not for the photo finish and who crossed the foot first or the chest. It is for the judges. And remember, just like the photo finish, the judge's decision is final. Thank you very much. The judges will now deliberate, and while they deliberate, while they head off to deliberate, honestly, let's give these teams a rousing round of applause. What an excellent display. Judges, I release you to go do your deliberations at this time.
No, we heard your belly. We heard both of us asking the question. No, when I was asking the question. No, when me hear that one, I heard that one, that's why I say, we can't take her. But then after me and her done this, I realized that we can't take her.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, while the judges deliberate, there are more conversations for us to have. And I'm getting the opportunity to speak with some persons who have participated in the debate competition. And one such person is Mr. O'Dane Brooks from the Development Bank of Jamaica. Hello, Mr. Brooks, how are you doing?
Doing great. Exciting match just now.
I agree. It was a really good one. Tell me, what do you do at DBJ?
So I'm the monitoring and evaluation specialist working on the Boosting Innovation Growth and Entrepreneurship Ecosystem Program. Quite an extensive name.
But nice, big work, man. So no wonder you could bring so much to the debate competition. What made you interested in participating in the public sector debating competition?
At the Development Bank of Jamaica, we are a leading entity that drives public dialogue. And by virtue of that, team members have a vested interest in national discourse. And as a result of that, it was a no-brainer for us to participate because we believe that policy development must involve the views of public sector workers. And so because of that public-spirited nature, it was inevitable for us to join.
Any debate experience prior to the competition?
Certainly, I would have had my stint throughout high school. A little rusty now, but we're getting back into form, so we should be here next year at the finals.
Oh, you're laying down the gauntlet from now?
Absolutely.
All right. For you, what was the best part of the competition?
I believe at the Development Bank, it has created a new culture for us. So we are now openly talking, we're discussing, but coming out at this forum to share what the DBJ does and for persons to even know more about DBJ is one of the highlights for us. But speaking about what TIU is doing, I believe that it is a very important role they're playing to cultivate discussion and also to provide us public sector workers with a platform where we can shape national dialogue and conversation.
Thank you very, very much, O'Dane Brooks, laying down the gauntlet that the Development Bank of Jamaica will be in the finals of the competition next year. I'm sure there are some people here who may have something to say about that, but what we know is that the TIU is very happy for the dialogue, and I'm sure they're also proud to have created that amazing platform for public sector workers like yourself to not take your skills only to the office, but to share it with your other colleagues who are also part of the public service, and of course, to the nation of Jamaica. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a break, and when we come back, we'll hear from the judges about who is clinching that bronze medal, and we're setting ourselves up for the final match.